Hey everybody, this is Tom with VermiBag. Now last week I did a video showing pulling some castings out of this little Mammoth that I had, that blue prototype Mammoth. And the castings were really wet. There were worms mixed everywhere within them. And again, it was a typical issue of waiting too long before I harvested them. And also running the system way too wet and kind of neglecting it. But anyway, we pulled all those castings and we put them in a mortar tray. And then I went ahead and took my standard little bait buckets that I make out of those little plastic containers with the holes drilled in it. And I placed one of those in each side of the mortar tray. Now I've been running that, I don't know, the last week and a couple days now. It's been a little bit over a week. And I have periodically went in there and added a little bit more of the ground up bird seed that I use, which is basically a worm chow. And I'd sprinkle it down a little bit. And I also added some more bedding in there. And I got lots of buckets of bedding here. I made some fresh bedding up last week too. And I've been also spraying it a little bit with water to keep it nice and damp, and also kind of let the water filter down through the worm chow and bring it down into the bottom of that tray. So we're going to go over and take a look at that. The same time, for this last week and a half, I've been adding a lot of new bedding just on one side of the little Mammoth, and doing the same thing as I was doing like on the bait trays, except this is over the whole end of the Mammoth. And I'm going to pull all those worms out too. They've pretty much migrated over to that side. And then all the contents we get from those two, we're going to go ahead and set up a little VermiBag tote just to put them in there temporarily until I can get this other little Mammoth all set up on the stand, because I need to take the stand apart that the blue little Mammoth is on because it's too big. Again, it was the prototype. And the stand was slightly longer than the stand I need now. So I need to take it all apart, put it back together so it'll fit the new little Mammoths, and that'll be a separate video. So in the meantime, while I'm doing that, I need a place for these worms to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and set them up in that VermiBag tote. So I'll bring you over and we'll pull that mortar tray out. We'll pull the worms out of there first and see how many we have. Okay, so this is the mortar tray that I put all this stuff in. And first thing, I kind of want to go around the edge here and just see if I can find any worms along the outer edge. Now this material's dried out a little bit. I mean, it's actually pretty nice now. It's still probably a little too wet to screen, but it's pretty nice. Now digging through the outside here, I actually don't see any worms. And if you remember from last week, there were a lot of worms in here. So I'm pretty confident that there's going to be an awful lot of worms inside both of these bait trays. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull one of these out, and then I'm going to go pull this tray up on the top here for you guys can see what's going on and put it in it. So just pull this one out first. Go ahead and dump this thing out and see how many worms we got. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit left of a banana skin. Yeah, so the worms did pretty good job. I mean, they migrated into that area, you know, very quickly. I think it's been just a little over a week, but it did a really good job. And this is just one of the trays. Now we have two of these trays as well, so there's a lot of worms here. There's probably a half a pound, I suppose, of worms in this pile here, or close to it anyway. Maybe a little less, but there's quite a few worms. So that's the first one. Let's go ahead and scoot that over. And let's go ahead and pull the second one out here. We'll do the same thing here. Yeah, same thing. I see an awful lot of worms in here. Banana skin. You know, these worms are really attracted to this bedding, and this bedding doesn't actually have any cardboard at all in it. When I made the bedding up last week, all I had was shredded paper, so It's coconut coir, shredded paper, coffee grounds, you know, some eggshells. But for the most part, there's no cardboard in it, which I normally try and put some in if I can, but it just goes to show that you know, the worms will come to this bedding even if there's not cardboard in it. So it worked really well. I'm real happy. There's a lot of worms here. That's going to be a really good start for that tote for right now until I can get it into the little Mammoth. Now let's take a quick peek at the rest of the container here and see if we've left anything behind here. Like I said, I was digging around earlier. I honestly didn't see hardly any. Well, hardly any. I didn't see any. I'm going to have to say that was a really good success. I haven't seen a single worm, which is hard to believe. I mean, there's got to be some in here. I'm sure there are, but I just don't see them right now. But there are not very many. And again, if you remember, this was last week. And look at all the worms that are in there. Different areas. I mean, there's a lot of worms in this bedding. And now, I can't even find one. So that's as close to 100% as I think I can get. There's one worm finally. I'll throw that on the other side. So pretty successful. And I just wanted to, anybody that hasn't seen the other videos on this, I mean, all I use are these little containers that you can buy at the grocery store. This is, I think, a Ziploc one. But, and then I use an soldering iron to just punch a bunch of holes in the side of it. Now I don't put any holes on the bottom because I don't want all this food that's in here, I don't want it leaching through the bottom and the worms hanging out underneath. So if they want to get at this food, they need to come up and go into these holes and get captured. So that way all this, the juices and stuff that attract them will actually be retained in here. But I do put them on all the other sides. And these things work really, really well. You know, with some good bedding and some food, you know, you can capture, get worms to migrate into them really well. And another big key, though, like I said before, is the fact that you're trying to migrate worms out of material that has hardly any food. And there's really hardly any food at all in these castings. It's pretty bare pickings for the worms. So when you stick something in here that's really good, they're all going to go to it really quickly. So let's go over and take a look at the little Mammoth, the little section I'm migrating there, and see what kind of worms I got over into that area. So this is just one, probably about a third, not even quite a third, probably a quarter of the little Mammoth surface area here. And then I've just been adding worm chow and some good scraps and stuff in here, and then additional bedding, and then keeping this side really wet. So let's go ahead and pull some of this out and see what kind of worms we have underneath here. It's kind of like the other. There are a lot of worms here, again. You know, they really migrate over to this bedding. I'm just going to keep putting this all over in this tub, and then we'll, yeah. And all the worms are just concentrated just in this little section right here where all this new bedding is. I mean, they're right in this top layer of about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to just take out this 1.5 inch layer here, put it into this tray. Again, there are a lot of worms in here. They've really migrated over this section really well. I'm going to scrape down about an inch and a half into these castings and get some of these worms that are hanging out along the bottom. It's more of a finished castings, but there's quite a few worms right here in this general area. I don't want to pull too many of these castings out because these are all well finished castings. If you look at this material, I mean, it's, you know, well processed for sure. So let's dig down in there a little bit. Yeah, down deeper underneath on this side right here, I still have some worms. So I'm gonna have to place all this material here. As I pull it out, I'll put it in another mortar tray and then stick another bait tray in there and try and pull out these last remaining worms. But I definitely got most of them. If I dig over here to the right and pull some of this material, you can see again there's no, well, there is one worm. There's hardly any worms over in this other area. So they all migrated over this side in this week. And so I'm going to have a pretty good success rate even on this bag. And this is on a big bag trying to get them migrate an awful long ways. So if I put this in a mortar tray and then have 2 bait trays in it like I did before, they don't have to move very far to get into those trays. So it works really well. So let's pull all these castings now over onto the tray and put them into the little tote to temporarily put them in there until I can get the little Mammoth set up. So this is the VermiBag tote I'm going to go ahead and put all this stuff into. This happens to be one of the old ones that actually has the migration panels in it that I used to put in, but they're just not worth the time and effort to put it in where you can actually make your own little dividers with a piece of wood or plastic or something, and it works exactly the same way. So open this sucker up, and then all I'm going to do is just take this material. This is the first 2 that are out of the mortar trays. I'm just going to dump this material in here without making a mess, hopefully. And then the second one that came out of, I'm going to turn this a little bit so I don't make a mess. I'm actually going to try and put these finished castings down towards the bottom here on each side. Okay, and then just put the rest of it in there. So as you can tell, there's an awful lot of worms in here. That was a very successful separation, especially on the mortar tray. There's still a few more inside the bag itself, but again, it's much harder to get them to migrate, you know, 2.5 feet across a bag to go into a section, especially in a week. So where in the mortar tray, they were only having to migrate 6-8 inches. So that's it. Again, pretty quick and simple and pretty effective separation of worms from castings. My next job, like I said, is going to be go ahead and empty this little Mammoth out and then take this stand apart, maybe do a video on making the stand because I need to make it a little bit smaller. And then I'll go ahead and mount that other little Mammoth that I had and I made up last week. We'll put that in here. And then all those worms I just put into the tote. I'll transfer them into here, and that will give us a good worm population to start this new system off with. So that's it for today. This is Tom with VermiBag. Till next time, ciao.